His grandfather's last words had echoed through 50 years. "Promise me you'll never touch the living room floor." Through decades of farming, creaking floorboards, and endless family speculation, they honored his cryptic request. Now, as Michael removed the first wooden plank on that winter evening, his hands trembling, he couldn't believe what lay hidden beneath. What he discovered that night would change everything they knew about their grandfather. John Miller was the kind of farmer they don't make anymore. For over 40 years, he worked the fertile soil of his land from sunrise to sunset, his weathered hands knowing exactly when to plant and when to harvest. The local farmers often came to him for advice, drawn by his deep understanding of the land and the weather patterns that could make or break a season's crop. His own fields always seemed to produce the best yields in the county, a testament to decades of careful cultivation and hard work. The summer of 1973 brought stifling heat to the Miller family farm. The crops were thriving despite the harsh weather, but inside the old farmhouse, a heavy atmosphere hung in the air. John, the aging farmer who had worked this land for so long, lay in his bed, surrounded by his family. Everyone knew these would be his final days. As his strength faded, John called his son Thomas to his bedside. The request he made that day would echo through the next 50 years. The wooden floor in the living room must remain untouched. They could renovate any other part of the house, but that floor had to stay exactly as it was for 50 years. Thomas found himself puzzled by the oddly specific time frame. Why 50 years? Why not 10 or 20? But his father's eyes held such intensity that Thomas couldn't bring himself to question it. He simply nodded and gave his word. After John's passing, life continued on the Miller farm. Thomas took over the operations, determined to maintain his father's legacy. The seasons changed, crops were planted and harvested, and the old farmhouse witnessed it all. The living room floor creaked beneath their feet, marking the passing of time with its growing squeaks and groans. As the years rolled by, the floor showed increasing signs of wear. Thomas would carefully repair loose boards and fill gaps, but true to his word, he never replaced the entire floor. His wife often suggested renovating, pointing out how other farmers were modernizing their homes. Thomas would simply shake his head and remind her of his promise. The mystery of the floor became a family legend. Thomas's son Michael grew up hearing different theories about his grandfather's request. Some thought John had been growing senile in his final days. Others joked that the old farmer had been playing an elaborate practical joke. But Thomas never wavered in keeping his word. The floor witnessed birthdays, holidays, and countless family gatherings. It creaked under Christmas trees, supported furniture rearrangements, and bore silent witness to both celebrations and hardships. Through it all, the question remained, what made this ordinary wooden floor so special? Michael often found himself studying the floorboards during quiet moments, trying to unlock their secret. But as a child, then a teenager, and finally a young man, he could never spot anything unusual. The wood seemed perfectly ordinary, if increasingly weathered. By 2020, the farmhouse was showing its age. The roof needed work, the windows were drafty, and the plumbing system was more patched than pipe. But it was the floor that concerned Michael most. Every step brought new creaks, and certain boards had developed an ominous sag. Thomas, now in his 70s, had to move into a nursing home after a stroke. The responsibility of the farm fell to Michael, along with the mounting maintenance costs of the old house. The decision weighed heavily on him. Pour money into renovations or sell the property his family had farmed for generations? As Michael calculated repair costs in 2023, something struck him. It had been exactly 50 years since his grandfather's passing. The mysterious waiting period was finally over. Could there be more to his grandfather's request than simple sentimentality? As the great tree crashed to the earth with a ground-shaking thud, a profound silence fell over the field. Silas stood for a long moment, his heart pounding, a mixture of guilt and anticipation swirling in his gut. He had just broken his brother's 50-year-old sacred rule. He walked slowly towards the massive stump, its fresh-cut surface a pale wound against the dark soil. He scanned the area, the upturned earth, the scattered wood chips. He saw nothing. There was no hidden box, no sign of anything unusual. A wave of confusion and a hint of foolishness washed over him. Had the family legend just been a story after all? Was his brother's strange obsession with this single tree simply a quirk, an unexplainable eccentricity of a man whose mind had been touched by war? It seemed possible, and yet Silas couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. The intensity in his brother's eyes all those years ago had to have meant something. Driven by a lifetime of unanswered questions, he refused to give up. He returned from the barn with a heavy spade and a pickaxe. If the secret wasn't on the surface, then it had to be below. He began to dig, his shovel scraping against the thick, tangled network of roots that spread out from the stump like gnarled fingers. The work was exhausting, but as he dug deeper, clearing the soil from around the stump, his shovel struck something that was not a rock or a root. It made a dull, soft thudding sound. He knelt down and cleared the dirt away with his hands. And then he saw it. Beneath the main root ball was a thick, black plastic sack, the kind used for heavy-duty refuse. It had clearly been placed there intentionally, the tree's roots growing over and around it over the decades, embracing it, protecting it. With a final surge of adrenaline, he worked the sack free from the earth and the roots and dragged it out into the open. It was heavy and lumpy. He carefully untied the knotted top, which had become brittle with age, and peered inside. The moment he saw the contents, a cold shock went through him, a feeling so intense it made him physically recoil. This was not a sentimental treasure. This was not a practical joke. This was the dark, physical embodiment of his brother's pain. Inside the plastic sack, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp earth, lay his brother Lester's ghosts from the Vietnam War. He recognized the distinct shape of an M16 rifle, the standard issue weapon for American soldiers in that era. Next to it were several steel ammunition clips, still loaded, and at the bottom of the bag, heavy and menacing, were two olive-drab pineapple-shaped fragmentation grenades. Silas stood up and backed away, his mind reeling. He now understood. He finally understood everything. The silence, the distance, the haunted look in his brother's eyes that had never truly left him, and the fierce, unwavering protection of this single tree. To understand why a man would bury his past in such a way, you must understand the invisible wounds that so many soldiers brought back with them from the jungles of Vietnam. In that era, the term post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, did not exist in the public consciousness. Soldiers returning from the horrors of combat were often expected to simply get over it, to quietly reintegrate into a society that did not and could not understand what they'd been through. They were suffering from a condition that had no name and no recognized treatment, a silent epidemic of shell shock and combat fatigue. For these men, the objects they carried, the rifle in their hands, the grenades on their belts, became more than just tools. They became powerful, physical symbols of their trauma. The rifle was not just a piece of metal and wood. It was an extension of themselves, a symbol of the violence they had witnessed and participated in, a representation of the person they were forced to become just to survive. To come home, to become a farmer, a husband, a brother again, many veterans felt they had to kill the soldier inside them, and that is what Lester had done, in the most literal and symbolic way imaginable. He had come home to the farm, taken the tools of his other, darker life, and given them a burial. He was not just hiding illegal weapons. He was trying to bury a part of himself, a part that he hated and feared. As Silas stared at the tree stump, the truth washed over him in a wave of profound sadness and understanding. The tree had not been protecting the weapons. The weapons had been a sacrifice to the tree. He realized that when his brother Lester had planted that small sapling 50 years ago, he was planting a memorial. It was a living tombstone for the young man he had been before the war, and for the part of his soul that he felt had died in the mud and the chaos of the jungle. Lester's lifelong obsessive protection of the tree was an act of protecting his own fragile, hard-won peace. It was his way of ensuring that the soldier he had buried would remain buried forever. With trembling hands, Silas pulled out his phone. He knew the grenades were incredibly dangerous and unstable after 50 years in the ground. He called the police. Within the hour, the quiet farm was filled with the lights of sheriff's deputies and, soon after, a bomb disposal unit from a nearby military base. They carefully and professionally secured the live grenades, taking them away to be safely detonated. When they offered to take the rifle as well, Silas made a decision. He explained the story, and the authorities, understanding the profound personal nature of the discovery, allowed him to keep the now unloaded and deactivated rifle and the other personal military effects. The secret was now out in the open, but the mystery was finally solved. Silas hadn't found a treasure of monetary value. He had found something far more precious. He had found the answer to a question that had silently shaped his entire life. He finally understood his brother. He understood the deep well of pain that lay hidden behind Lester's quiet, stoic exterior. The discovery, as shocking as it was, had brought the two brothers closer in death than they had often been in life. A few weeks later, Silas erected a simple granite marker near the spot where the great tree had once stood. It didn't have dates or a long epitaph. It just had his brother's name, his military rank, and a simple carving of a single deeply rooted tree. He had finally given his brother the memorial he had always been silently tending to.